In December 2015, Gary Neville was appointed in his first managerial role at a Valencia side who sat 5 points off the La Liga Champions League places. He was sacked after just 3 league wins in 4 months, and he left Valencia sitting only 6 points above the relegation zone. But why did it go so wrong? And how much of it was actually his fault? Well, as managerial appointments go, Neville couldn't have picked a much harder first job than Valencia. After years of financial woes and instability, Singaporean entrepreneur Peter Lim had taken over in 2014. Valencia fans, notorious for being among the most impatient in Spain, gave Lim a hero's welcome on his arrival, but the honeymoon period didn't last long. Issues stemmed largely from Lim's close ties to super agent Jorge Mendes. In the summer of 2014, Valencia had replaced popular manager Juan Antonio Pizzi with Mendes' first ever client, Nuno Espirito Santo, and that summer they also signed a host of Mendes clients. Naturally, fans were skeptical of the dealings, but the results were good, and Valencia qualified for the Champions League for the first time in 3 years. But as results slipped the following season, fan mood changed quickly and turned on Nuno, who was seen to be Mendes' man. Sentiments were so strong that even after a 3-0 derby win over Levante, chants of Nuno go now could be heard booming around Mestalla. And by November, he was gone. By this point, Lim was keen to distance himself, publicly at least, from Mendes, and so turned instead to Neville. The pair were friends and business partners who co-owned Salford City and Hotel Football, among other things. But the problem was that Neville's qualifications for the role didn't stretch very far. Firstly, he didn't particularly want to be a manager. He'd turned down approaches from Middlesbrough, Newcastle and Derby and was happy working as a businessman and a pundit. And secondly, by his own admission, he knew very little about La Liga. But third, and probably most important of all, he didn't speak the language. You see, Neville had become a respected pundit and communicator in English, but not being able to speak Spanish had arguably stripped him of his greatest skill. Still, he agreed to take the job as a stopgap until the end of the season and as a favour to Lim. Now, initial reactions to the appointment were a mixture of surprise and excitement. A survey on the website of Valencia's sports newspaper, Super Deporte, claimed that Neville was backed by 71% of fans, and the mood was perhaps best summed up by a headline in the same paper, which rejoiced, "Gary is not Mendes' man." And so, Neville came in, and he did so with grand plans for Valencia. He brought in a new data capture department and gave the players iPads to show them clips and statistics. He tried to set up weekly meetings with the club's sporting director and academy manager to ensure continuity, and even attended commercial meetings. But for all his focus on the big picture, the real reason that he was at Valencia was to get immediate results on the pitch. His first match was a Champions League group stage clash with an already eliminated Lyon, where his players seemed unsure of what the tactical plan was. Neville wanted his team to press high, but they left themselves wide open on the counter-attack and were fortunate to come away with just a 2-0 defeat. And this uncertainty continued over the next few months of Neville's reign as he searched for a tactical identity. He began by playing a 4-3-3 before switching to a 5-3-2. When that didn't work, he tried a 4-4-2 and the changes continued. Now, injuries did play their part, but in his first 16 games, he never played the same team twice. He won just 4 of those matches, and none of them were in the league. And of course, there was instability off the pitch too. Within Neville's first 2 weeks at Valencia, club captain Dani Parejo and senior player Javi Fuego both told him they wanted to leave. Unsure how to respond, Neville sought advice from his old boss, Sir Alex Ferguson, who told him to get rid of both. Neville ignored it though and complicated the matter further by stripping Parejo of the captaincy and naming 4 players as his replacement, one of whom was Fuego. As Neville passed the 2-month mark in the job, the wait for a league win continued. And as he tried to turn things around, his inability to express himself continued to be a problem. After a 1-1 draw with Deportiva La Coruña, he conducted a press conference in English that was later shown on a popular TV show. However, incorrect subtitles prompted the show's co-host and former Valencia goalkeeper, Santi Canizares, to criticise Neville for things that he hadn't actually said. On the training ground, Neville was forced to pause sessions for 3 or 4 minutes at a time in order to communicate his tactical demands through a translator. During these lengthy breaks, players took to jogging on the spot to keep warm. Now, eventually he delegated training sessions to assistants, Paco Ayestran and his brother Phil, but results remained poor. Valencia had at least made it into the Copa del Rey semi-finals, but sadly ended the run in spectacular fashion with a 7-0 defeat to Barcelona, the joint second biggest loss in the club's history. Neville declared his team, quote, absolutely must win their next game at Real Betis, but they lost it 1-0. And in many ways, the match was a microcosm of his spell in charge. On the morning of that game, Alvaro Negredo had approached Neville and urged him to do the team talk in his broken Spanish without the help of a translator. Neville had decided to make 5 changes to the starting lineup and to switch his system again to an old-fashioned 4-4-2. When trying to communicate how direct he wanted his players to be, he attempted to say 1-2-3 quick passes in Spanish, but he said it in French instead. And by this point, calls for Neville to go were growing. Superdeporte conducted another confidence survey on Neville, and this time 90% of fans wanted him to go. Now, he did win 5 of his next 7 games, but where results improved, performances largely remained poor. He was finally able to get that elusive first La Liga win over Espanyol, but this was largely down to some superb saves from Diego Alves, the 3rd different goalkeeper that he'd fielded in as many games. And then the run ended in calamitous fashion. With his team heading towards a 3-1 defeat against Atletico Madrid, Neville readied Negredo to appear from the bench, but hadn't realised that the centre-back Anderlan Santos had been sent off. After being informed of the red card by Negredo, he sat the striker down and instructed the defender to get ready. But as the stadium erupted in anger, he then had another change of heart and he called Negredo forward again. Not long after, they were knocked out of the Europa League by Athletic Club, and by this point, Neville knew that he was out of his depth. He later spoke of feeling tactically beaten up by coaches like Ernesto Valverde and Diego Simeone, and admitted that the stress had left him looking ill. The next game was a 2-0 loss to Celta Vigo that left Valencia just 6 points above the relegation zone. And now it was Gary Go Now that was booming around Mestalla. Neville refused to resign, but fearing a genuine relegation battle, Lim relieved his friend of his duties. He'd won just 3 of 16 La Liga games and failed to keep a single clean sheet in the competition. Now, few actually blamed Neville explicitly for his catastrophic few months in charge. He had of course been dealt a tough hand, but with his lack of preparedness, inability to speak the language and constant tweaking, he perhaps didn't play it that well either. The upside of all of this, of course, is that one of the top pundits in English football knows exactly how hard it can be to be a manager. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League football story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.